right, guys, when you are using the elimination method, the first thing you have to do is decide, what do I want to eliminate? Do I want to eliminate X or Y? And that's strictly your choice, okay? If I want to eliminate X, I'm looking at 5 and 3, and if I want to eliminate Y, I'm looking at 7 and 4. Which one seems easier?
3 and 5.
I think 3 and 5 sounds a little bit easier. So I'm going to work with eliminating X. However, you can work with 7 and 4 just the same, and you should get the same answer. So the idea for elimination is, if I want the X to eliminate, I need to make 3 and 5 become the same number. And the easiest way to do that is to take the coefficient on the number you want to get rid of in the top, which is 3, and multiply that by the bottom equation. And the coefficient in the bottom and multiply that by the top. Essentially, you're like reversing them. Now, in this case, if I distribute that 5 and that 3, I'm going to end up with a 15x on the top and a 15x on the bottom. And that's actually not going to eliminate. That's going to make 30. I need one to be positive and one to be negative. To do that, you add a negative to one of your two numbers. It doesn't matter which one. I'm going to add it to the 3. You can add it to the 5 and it still works. Right? So from here, I'm going to distribute that 5 to the top. 5 times 3x, 5 times 7y, and 5 times 58. And I'm going to distribute the negative 3 to everything in the bottom. Negative 3 times 5x, negative 3 times 4y, and negative 3 times 20. What happens here is when you add these together, the x's create a 0x, which means they eliminate. That's why it's called elimination. So now I don't have to worry about the x anymore. So 35y plus 12y is 23y. And 290 plus negative 60 is 230. And if we divide both sides here by 23, we end up with y equals 10. The solution to a system is a coordinate point, okay? So from here, I need to find the x value. Now, FYI, your midterm is majority multiple choice. So you could solve for y equals 10 and probably be done if the only one of your 4 options that has y is 10 is one of the letters. Does that make sense? I would always just advise you to keep going, but that is a test-taking strategy, right? You don't necessarily have to do the whole thing. So from here, I'm going to pick an equation, top or bottom. For me personally, I'd rather work with the number 20 than that 58. Okay, so I'm going to use this one, but it's totally up to you which one you use. And then I'm going to take this y that's 10, and I'm going to replace this y with a 10. And then I'm just going to do some manipulation, some algebra skills here to work on getting the x alone. Okay, and if I divide both sides by 5, I get x is negative 4. So the solution to my system is negative 410. Now, this is a midterm, right? It's worth 10% of your overall grade. So I recommend checking your answer. To check your answer, 3, which is that I'm using the top equation, 3, if my board wants me to write it 3 times negative 4 plus 7 times 10 is what I'm checking. So negative 12 plus 70 equals 58, right? So just a quick check to check your work, since it is a midterm. All right, next question. This was the spiral question on your test from Friday, which I will get back to you. There was a decent amount of you that skipped it, that didn't know how to do it, so I feel like it's definitely important to make sure I go over this with you. Some of you use the elimination method, but if the directions say substitution, you have to use substitution for the midterm. So solve the system using the substitution method. When you are looking at the substitution method, look at all the coefficients. 3, there's no number in front. Negative 4, 6. You want to go to the one that there's no number in front. Okay, so I want to get this equation, and I want to get this part of that equation by itself. I just want y. because that's the one with no number in front. That's the easiest. So how would I get rid of the 3x? If I want to move the 3x to the other side, any ideas? Minus 3x. Now you can write this as 6 minus 3x or negative 3x plus 6. Totally your choice. Now that I worked with the top equation, I want to focus in on the bottom equation. And what I'm going to do in this equation is I'm going to take out the y because I know what y equals. Y equals negative 3x plus 6. So I'm going to put in, for the y, negative 3x plus 6. And you'll see I'm keeping all of the rest of the equation the same. If I made this an x equals equation, I would have taken x out of this equation. So it just depends on what you solve for. It's not always y. So if I distribute that 6, I get negative 18x and positive 36. And if I combine these like terms, that's negative 22x and positive 36. And if I subtract the 36, let's bring this up here. That's negative 22x and 66. So I end up with x equals negative 3. To solve for y, you use one of your 3 equations. You've got this equation here, you've got this equation here, and you've created this new equation. The easiest one to use is your new equation, but that doesn't mean that's the only one to use. You can use any of the 3 equations. So I'm going to take this equation, negative 3x plus 6, and I'm going to put negative 3 into the equation. Negative times a negative is a positive, so I end up with y equals. Just a quick check. Because again, midterm. Take the top equation. Negative 9 plus 15 equals 6, which it should. You could check the bottom equation too, right? So just quick ways to check your answer, make sure you're right. So elimination, you're using multipliers. Substitution, you're solving for either x equals or y equals. Anybody have questions on either of them? All right, next question. Find the x and y intercepts. When I am finding an x-intercept, I am going to pretend like the y portion of the equation is not even there. So for the x-intercept here, I'm going to take the 2x part of the equation, ignore the minus 4y part, and set it equal to 16. And so I'll divide both sides by 2 and end up with x equals 8. In a coordinate point, x, comma, y, x comes first. So if the x-intercept is 8, I need to put the 8 in the x spot. Now to get that x-intercept, I pretended like y wasn't there. If y's not there, what's the value of y? 0. Okay, so I'm going to put a 0 here. When you plot this point on the x-axis, it's 8, and the y value is 0 because you're not going up or down at all. For the y-intercept, I'm going to write this equation, but I'm going to write it without the x. So no 2x, negative 4y equals 16. And I'll divide both sides by negative 4, y equals negative 4. In a coordinate point, y comes second. And we pretended like x wasn't there. And to pretend like x isn't there means that x is 0. Sometimes I have kids make the x and the y-intercept together, right, and plot the point 8, negative 4. Plotting the point 8, negative 4 is not going to get you a line. It's going to get you a single point. You need 2 points to make the line. So you need both of them to be their own separate point. And then you can connect them, and that'll give you the line. Questions on that one? All right. And the last 2 things we did in this unit is inequalities. The first one here is called a compound inequality. There were 2 types of compound inequalities we worked with, the ands and the ors. Is this an and or an or? Why? Because there's no or, okay? Okay, if I know it's an and, then I already know what that graph looks like. And, or, right? And comes together, or goes opposite. So I'm just going to sketch the graph. So So like say this were multiple choice and you had options that were graphs, you could cross off any OR graphs right away just by knowing what the graph looks like. Now I'm going to solve. I want to try to get the x in the middle alone. So I'm going to subtract out the 7. So 9 minus 7 is 2. I've got 2x over 3. The 7's in the middle cancel out, and I've got a 6. Now there are 2 ways to do this next step. If you decide to divide by 2/3, what do you need to make sure that you use in your calculator? If you divide by a fraction in the calculator, you have to use parentheses. If you don't use parentheses, you're going to get it wrong. All right? So if you are a divide by fraction person, use the parentheses. Otherwise, we can do the opposite of times divided by 3, which is times 3. Multiply the denominator out. And then divide by 2. Now I know that this number is 3 and this number is 9. Open or close circles? Closed. When you have this line here, you have closed. Compound inequalities, and first or. And comes together, or goes opposite. If you divide by a fraction, use parentheses. All right, absolute value inequalities, not as simple. I cannot look at that one and say if it's an or an or yet. Okay, first I need to get the bars alone. What I mean by that is I want to get this all by itself. I need to move the 2 and the 4. Move the 2 first. It's out here on its own. It's got to go first. Okay, so I've got x plus 8 over 4 is less than 3. The opposite of divided by 4 is times 4. The bars are alone here. I have 12. How many answers does an absolute value equation have? 2. I need to create both of them. The first one, I'm going to keep everything the same. The second one, I am going to change the symbol to go the opposite direction, and I'm going to make the number negative. So that's the switch here. Second equation, flip the sign, change the number. And then solve each of those. I have to decide if this is an and or an or. Some of you can do that without the graph. The easiest way to do that is to graph them. On a number line, if I were to graph these, the negative 20 has to come before the 4 because this is numerical order, right? Negative 20 comes before 4. Now the 4 is telling me go left, right? That arrow is telling me to go this direction. Whereas the 20, this arrow is telling me to go right. Is it an and or an or? It's an and. So this graph tells me that there should be an and here. If this is multiple choice, you're not going to see an option that has and. And answers look like that one above that I have circled. So I need to write x in the middle of 20 and 4. Negative 20 and 4. For the negative 20, the mouth opens at the x and the point of the arrow points at the negative 20. I just want to make sure that stays consistent. For the x, it points at the x and the mouth opens at the 4. I just want to make sure that that stays consistent. So that's my final and answer. This is the stuff that's going to be on your midterm from the review unit, these big 5 concepts, okay? So solving a system through substitution, solving a system through elimination, solving a system through maybe graphing in terms of standard form. So finding x and y intercepts is the key there, okay? Compound inequalities, heavy on the fractions, right? We solved with fractions. Absolute value, heavy on the fractions. You're going to see a lot of like the division part, okay? Because we added that to this semester. So today's goals are all focused around those 5 things. making sure that we are okay with solving the systems, x and y intercepts, compound inequalities, absolute value inequalities. Your midterm makes up 10% of your overall grade. Often I have kids ask me how many points it is. The points doesn't matter with a midterm, like points matter with a test. Points matter with a test because throughout the semester you take so many tests and they all get averaged together. So the more points on a test, the more it's weighted in your GPA, in your grade. There's only one midterm, so it doesn't matter. Nothing's ever going to average in with it. It's 10% of your grade, whether it's 20 points or 100 points. I think it's 35 points. But that does not compare to the 33 points from your test on Friday. Does that make sense? The 33 points on your test on Friday gets averaged in with like 5 other tests. This 35 points is on its own. It's going to stay like this the whole semester. Okay, so that makes it a little more important. Today what we're going to do is some self-paced review, because now that I went over that, some of you are going to need more practice, some of you are going to blow through that. So I wanted it to be self-paced so you're not sitting there bored if you know how to do this stuff. All right? So what you're going to do is go to your workbook on page 14, and you're going to see a template for 5 problems, just like the 5 problems you did on your warm-up, just like the 5 success criteria you see on the front board. These are the 5 things you need to know from this unit. Okay, you're going to complete all 5 problems. I'm going to give you a station, either yellow or pink. My ask from you is that you just stay with that color. You don't have to stay in the order. On the station, there is a how do I start this step-by-step instruction if you're still stuck. Read that. When you're done, flip the station up. Make sure you're right before moving on to the next one. Everybody okay with that? 5 questions, 1 of each type. Now, here's what I need you to pay attention to. Once you finish those 5 stations, because you will finish them fairly quickly, some of you, you've got 3 anchor options. Anchor option 1 is geometry Socrative. We will not be spending class time reviewing geometry. We literally just spent 2 days last week reviewing geometry. So tomorrow we will not touch geometry. Today we will not touch geometry. This is exactly what the midterm looks like in the geometry. There are 9 multiple choice and 1 open-ended question on this Socrative. On your midterm, there are 9 multiple choice and 1 open-ended. So this is going to be your independent practice for geometry if you want it. It's going to be open now in class, but it's also going to be open when you're at home. So you've got that option. If you're like, I got 100 on the geometry test, I don't need geometry review. You've got 2 other options. You can do column B from the stuff we just did together and continue to practice that old material, or you can start, I'll move this. You can start working on the midterm review guide, which is just paper and pencil practice for the midterm. That's here. The rest of class is independent. Does anybody have questions on the directions? They'll all be on the board too. So if I lost you anywhere, they'll be up here. All right, I'm going to give you a station. So pink 1 is in the back. Pink 2 is on the hand side. Pink 3 is right there. Pink 4 is right there. Pink 5 is right there. Okay. Pink 1 is on the back. Pink 2 is on the hand sanitizer. Okay. Pink 3 is right here. And then Carson will do pink 4 is right here. And then pink 5. All right, yellow 1 is there. Yellow 2 is there. Yellow 3 is there. Yellow 4 is right behind me. Yellow 5 is right behind me. Yellow 1 is here. Yellow 2 is here. Yellow 3. Yep, yellow 4. Yellow 5. If you're yellow, just stay yellow. If you're pink, stay pink. Otherwise, you can move at your own pace. You can see over here what class averages were. I'd say for a geometry test, that's pretty good. This is typically one of the lower ones. There's so much for you to remember in this unit. I get that. I sympathize with you. But at the end of the day, an 86 is a pretty good average, right? So you can kind of figure out, where do I fall on that spectrum? Am I far below that? Maybe I need to study these reviewed words, these vocabulary words before our midterm. If you're kind of right there, I think keep up with what you're doing. That being said, we're not reviewing geometry. So if you're somebody who really struggled on this test, make sure you are doing that anchor 1 at some point between now and Wednesday, okay? Wednesday is the multiple choice section of your midterm. There are 9 geometry multiple choice questions on your midterm, and there are 9 multiple choice geometry questions on that Socrative. There is 1 geometry open-ended question on your midterm, and there is 1 geometry open-ended question on that Socrative. So if you want to prepare for the geometry section of the midterm, do that anchor, okay? All of the explanations and feedback are there for you. If you submit an answer wrong, the right answer will pop up with the explanation. You can do it as many times as you want. I'm leaving it open, okay? But just wanted you to know that that's there, okay, in terms of your test. If any of you have specific questions on your test, let me know. I'll come around and I'll answer them for you. If you don't have specific questions, you're going to look at your test, you're going to put your test in your folder, and you're going to pass your folders up, okay? You've got plenty of time. We still got 20 minutes, so take your time and look at that if you need to. You are going to spend the rest of the class completing one of those 3 anchors. Your midterm exam is on Wednesday and Thursday. So Wednesday is the multiple choice. Thursday is the open-ended. Thursday is a half day, but there are only 3 open-ended questions. So you have 10 minutes per problem. If you can't do those problems in 30 minutes, then you just don't know the material, okay? That is plenty of time for you to do it. So just make sure you're doing all of this stuff leading up to then to prepare for it. All right, so right now, 20 minutes, choose an anchor, work on that. Let me know if you have questions.